Hello, 5th grade. Today we're going to be reading chapter 13 and 14 of Number the Stars by Lois Lowry. We left off at the end of chapter 12 with Anne-Marie waking up suddenly after that really tense night, realizing it's 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning and her mom was not home yet after taking the Rosens to her Uncle Henrik's boat. And so she was looking for her mom. She looked out the window and she saw a dark shape huddled on the ground at the beginning of the path that her mom took to bring the Rosens, and she realized it was her mom on the ground. So now we're at chapter 13, and chapter 13 is titled Run as Fast as You Can. And we're going to see what on earth is going on. Still moving quietly so as not to wake her sister, Anne-Marie sped down the stairs and through the kitchen door. Her foot caught the loose step and she faltered for a moment, righting herself, then dashed across the ground to the place where her mother lay. "Mama!" she called desperately. "Mama!" "Shh," Mama said, raising her head. "I'm all right." "But Mama," Anne-Marie asked, kneeling beside her, "what's wrong? What happened?" Her mother pulled herself to a sitting position. She winced in pain. "I'm all right, really. Don't worry. And the Rosens are with Henrik. That's the important thing." She smiled a little, though her face was drawn with pain, and she bit her lip, the smile fading. We got there quite quickly, even though it was still so dark and it was difficult for the Rosens, not knowing the path. Henrik was there waiting on the boat, and he took them aboard and down below so quickly to the cabin they were invisible in an instant. He said the others were already there. Peter got them there safely, too. So I turned and hurried home. I was so anxious to get back to you girls. I should have been more careful. Talking softly, she brushed some grass and dirt from her hands. "Can you believe it? I was very, very nearly here, well, maybe just halfway, when I tripped over a root and went sprawling." Mama sighed. "So clumsy," she said, as if she were scolding herself. "I'm afraid my ankle is broken, Anne-Marie. Thank goodness it is nothing worse. An ankle mends, and I am home, and the Rosens are with Henrik." "You should have seen me, Anne-Marie," she said, shaking her head with a wry look. "Your proper mamma, crawling inch by inch. I probably looked like a drunkard." She reached for Anne-Marie's arm. "Here, let me lean on you. I think if you support me on this side, I can make my way up to the house. Goodness, what a clumsy fool I am. Here, let me put my arm over your shoulders. You're such a good, strong, brave girl. Now, very slowly. There." Mamma's face was white with pain. Anne-Marie could see it even through the faint light of the approaching dawn. She hobbled, leaning heavily on her daughter, pausing again and again toward the house. "When we get inside, I'll have a cup of tea, and then we'll call the doctor. I'll tell him that I fell on the stairs. You'll have to help me wash away the grass and twigs. Here, Anne-Marie, let me rest for a minute." They had reached the house, and Mamma sank down to the steps and sat. She took several deep breaths. Anne-Marie sat beside her and held her hand. "Mamma, I was so worried when you didn't come back." Mamma nodded. "I knew you would be. I thought of you worrying as I dragged myself along. But here I am, safe with you now. Everything is fine. What time is it?" "It must be 4:30, or close to it." "They will sail soon." Mamma turned her head and gazed across the meadow to the sea and the vast sky above it. There were no stars now, only the gray, pale sky with pinkness at its border. "Soon they will be safe, too." Anne-Marie relaxed. She stroked her mother's hand and looked down at the discolored, swollen ankle. "Mamma, what is this?" she asked suddenly, reaching into the grass at the foot of the steps. Mamma looked. She gasped. "Oh, my God," she said. Anne-Marie picked it up. She recognized it now, knew what it was. It was the packet that Peter had given to Mr. Rosen. "Mr. Rosen tripped on the step, remember? It must have fallen from his pocket. We'll have to save it and give it back to Peter." Anne-Marie handed it to her mother. "Do you know what it is?" Her mother didn't answer. Her face was stricken. She looked at the path and down at her ankle. "It's important, isn't it, Mama? It was for Uncle Henrik. I remember Peter said it was very important. I heard him tell Mr. Rosen." Her mother tried to stand but fell back against the steps with a groan. "My God," she murmured again. "It may all have been for nothing." Anne-Marie took the packet from her mother's hand and stood. "I will take it," she said. "I know the way, and it's almost light now. I can run like the wind." Mamma spoke quickly, her voice tense. "Anne-Marie, go into the house and get the small basket on the table. Quickly, quickly. Put an apple into it, and some cheese. Put this packet underneath. Do you understand? Hurry." Anne-Marie did instantly as she was told. The basket, the packet at the bottom. She covered it with a napkin, then then some wrapped cheese, an apple. She glanced around the kitchen, saw some bread, and added that. The little basket was full. She took it to where her mother was. You must run to the boat. If anyone should stop you. Who would stop me? Anne-Marie. You understand how dangerous this is. If any soldiers see you, if they stop you, you must pretend to be nothing more than a little girl, a silly, empty-headed little girl taking lunch to a fisherman, a foolish uncle who forgot his bread and cheese. Mama, what is it in the bottom? But her mother still didn't answer the question. Go, she said firmly. Go right now and run as fast as you can. Anne-Marie kissed her mother quickly, grabbed the basket from her mother's lap, turned, and ran toward the path. Fifth grade, what do you think is in that packet of information that Peter needs to get to Uncle Henrik? And, if you notice, Mrs. Johansson, Anne-Marie's mom, said it may have all been for nothing. So obviously, whatever's in that packet is probably going to help the Rosens and those other people get to safety. And without it, they could be in danger, or in danger of being found out. Let's keep reading. Chapter 14. On the dark path. Only now, entering the woods on the footpath, did Anne-Marie realize how cold the dawn was. She had watched and helped earlier as the others donned sweaters, jackets, and coats, and she had peered into the night, following them with her eyes, as they moved silently off, bulky in their garments, blankets in their arms. But she wore only a light sweater over her cotton dress. Though the October day later would be warmed by sunlight, now it was gray, chilly, and damp. She shivered. The path curved, and she could no longer look behind her and see the clearing with the farmhouse outlined against the pale sky and the lightening meadow beyond. Now there were only the dark woods ahead. Underfoot, the path, latticed with thick roots hidden under the fallen leaves, was invisible. She felt her way with her feet, trying not to stumble. The handle of the straw basket scratched her arm through her sweater. She shifted it and tried to run. She thought of a story she had often told to Kirsty as they cuddled in the bed at night. Once upon a time there was a little girl, she told herself silently, who had a beautiful red cloak. Her mother had made it for her. She wore it so often that everyone called her Little Red Riding Hood. Kirsty would always interrupt there. Why was it called a Red Riding Hood? Kirsty would ask. Why didn't they just call her Little Red Cloak? Well, it had a hood that covered her head. She had beautiful curls like you, Kirsty. Maybe someday Mama will make you a coat with a hood to cover your curls and keep you warm. But why, Kirsty would ask. Was it a riding hood? Was she riding a horse? Maybe she had a horse that she rode sometimes, but not in this story. Now stop interrupting every minute. Anne-Marie smiled, feeling her way through the dark, remembering how Kirsty always interrupted stories to ask questions. Often she just wanted to make the story last longer. The story continued. One day the little girl's mother said, I want you to take a basket of food to your grandmother. She is sick in bed. Come, let me tie your red cloak. The grandmother lived deep in the woods, didn't she? Kirsty would ask, in the dangerous woods where the wolves lived. Anne-Marie heard a small noise, a squirrel perhaps, or a rabbit scampering nearby. She paused, stood still on the path, and smiled again. Kirsty would have been frightened. She would have grabbed Anne-Marie's hand and said, A wolf! But Anne-Marie knew that these woods were not like the woods in the story. There were no wolves or bears or tigers, none of the beasts that populated Kirsty's vivid imagination. She hurried on. Still, they were very dark, these woods. Anne-Marie had never followed this path in the dark before. She had told her mother she would run, and she tried. Here the path turned. She knew the turning well, though it seemed different in the dark. If she turned to the left, it would take her to the road. Out where it would be lighter, wider, more traveled, but more dangerous, too. Someone could see her on the road. At this time of the dawn, other fishermen would be on the road hurrying to their boats for the long day at sea, and there might be soldiers. She turned to the right and headed deeper into the woods. It was why Mama and Peter had needed to guide those who were strangers here, the Rosens and the others. A wrong turn would have taken them into danger. So Little Red Riding Hood carried the basket of food and hurried along through the woods. It was a lovely morning, and the birds were singing. Little Red Riding Hood sang too as she walked. Sometimes she changed that part of the story, telling it to Kirsty. Sometimes it was raining or even snowing in the woods. Sometimes it was evening with long, frightened shadows so that Kirsty, listening, would snuggle closer and wrap her arms around Anne-Marie. But now, telling it to herself, she wanted sunlight and birdsong. Probably because it was actually dark. Here the path widened and flattened. It was a place where the woods opened on one side and the path curved beside a meadow at the edge of the sea. Here she could run, and she did. Here in daylight there would be cows in the meadow, and on summer afternoons Anne-Marie would always stop by the fence and hold out handfuls of grass, which the curious cows would take with their rough tongues. Here her mother had told her Mamma would always stop too as a child walking to school. Her dog Trofast would wriggle under the fence and run about in the meadow, barking excitedly, trying to chase the cows who always ignored him. The meadow was empty now, and colorless in the half light. She could hear the churning sea beyond and see the wash of daylight to the east, over Sweden. She ran as fast as she could, searching with her eyes for the place ahead where the path would re-enter the woods in its final segment, which led to town. Here. The bushes were overgrown, and it was difficult to see the path here, but she found the entrance beside the high blueberry bushes. How often she had stopped here in late summer to pick a handful of the sweet berries. Her hands and mouth would be blue afterward. Mamma always laughed when she came home. Now it was dark again, as the trees and bushes closed around her, and she had to move more slowly, though she still tried to run. Anne-Marie thought of Mamma, her ankle so swollen and her face so pained. She hoped Mamma had called the doctor by now. The local doctor was an old man, brusque and businesslike, though with kind eyes. He had come to the farmhouse several times during the summers of the past, his battered car noisy on the dirt road. He had come once when Kirsty, a tiny baby then, had been sick and wailing with an earache, and he had come when Lisa had spilled hot grease cooking breakfast and burned her hand. Anne-Marie turned again as the path divided once more. The left fork would take her directly to the village. It was the way they had come from the train, and the way Mamma had walked to school as a girl, but Anne-Marie turned to the right, heading now toward the harbor side, where the fishing boats lay at anchor. She had often come this way before, too, sometimes at the end of the afternoon, to pick out the Ingeborg, Uncle Henrik's boat, from the many returning, and to watch him and his helpers unload the day's catch of slippery, shimmering herrings still flopping in their containers. Even now, with the boats in the harbor ahead of empty fish, preparing to leave for the day's fishing, she could smell the oily, salty scent of herring, which always remained in the air here. It wasn't far now, and it was getting lighter. She ran almost as fast as she had run at school in the Friday foot races, almost as fast as she had run down the Copenhagen sidewalk on the day that the soldier had stopped her with his call of "Halt!" Anne-Marie continued the story in her head. Suddenly, as Little Red Riding Hood walked through the woods, she heard a noise. She heard a rustling in the bushes. "A wolf," Kirsty would say, shivering with fearful delight. "I know it's going to be a wolf." Anne-Marie always tried to prolong this part, to build up the suspense and tantalize her sister. She didn't know what it was. She stopped on the path and listened. Something was following her in the bushes. Little Red Riding Hood was very, very, very frightened. She would stop. She would stay silent for a moment, and beside her in the bed she could feel Kirsty holding her breath. Then Anne-Marie would go on in a low, dreadful voice. She heard a growl. Anne-Marie stopped suddenly and stood on the path. There was a turn immediately ahead. Beyond it, she knew, as soon as she rounded the turn, she would see the landscape open to the sea. The woods would be behind her there, and ahead of her would be the harbor, the docks, and the countless fishing boats. Very soon it would be noisy there, with engines starting, fishermen calling to one another, and gulls crying. But she had heard something else. She heard bushes rustling ahead. She heard footsteps, and she was certain it was not her imagination. She heard a low growl. Cautiously she took a step forward, and another. She approached the turn in the path, and the noises continued. Then they were there in front of her, 4 armed soldiers. With them, straining at taut leashes, were 2 large dogs, their eyes glittering, their lips curled. Okay, 5th grade. We are going to stop here. I know you want to keep reading. What do you think is going to happen? We saw, or as we read, Anne-Marie was comparing her journey through the woods to the journey that Little Red Riding Hood makes in the woods in her fairy tale story. What's similar about both of them, both of those stories? And what's different? Is it a literal wolf that Anne-Marie is scared of? No. But you could kind of think of, there are dogs, apparently, but you could kind of think of the soldiers as the wolf in this story. She's almost there, and then suddenly this terrifying thing appears. I want you to make a prediction right now. What's going to happen? Are the soldiers going to search her basket? Are they going to only look inside, or are they going to search farther down and find the packet of information? Is Anne-Marie going to be able to talk her way away from the soldiers and get to the boat in time, or is the boat going to leave without her being able to deliver the packet of information? We will find out if your prediction is correct next time we read.